Okay, good afternoon and good evening. I'm Alon Confino. I'm the director of the Institute for Holocaust, Genocide and Memory Studies at the University of Massachusetts. And I'm delighted to welcome you to another meeting of encounters, a program that takes place with the Institute and together with the Avraham Arman Research Institute of Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University, directed by Amos Goldberg. And this year, our series tackles the topics of conversations on racism, antisemitism, and Islamophobia. Before we start, I'd like to remind you that on April 5th, at the same time, we're going to have a conversation with Claudvina Herold on her book, When Sunday Comes, Gospel Music in the Soul and Hip Hop Eras. Claudvina is a professor of history at the University of Virginia. And on May 10th, again, at the same time, we're going to have a conversation with Magda Tetter on her book, Blood Libel, on the Trail of an Anti-Semitic Myth. Magda is a professor of history and the Schwidler Chair in Judaic Studies at Fordham University. Let me just remind you of a few housekeeping things. The Institute is on Facebook and has an email list. If you want to subscribe, you can email us. I remind you to place your questions at the end of our conversation at the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, not at the chat. And also, this event is being recorded. It's added to the virtual library of the Institute on YouTube, and you can also find a link to the recording in our website. So today, Amos and I have the tremendous pleasure and honor of having with us Raef Zreik to discuss the Declaration on Antisemitism and Palestine, signed by more than 100 Palestinian intellectuals and scholars, and published on November 29th, 2020. We all know that anti-Semitism has become a fraught and controversial subject in Europe, in America, in universities, in other public institutions. And oftentimes this debate takes place among Jews and Gentiles. At the heart of this debate in these years has been what is permissible and not permissible to say about Israel and about Zionism. And it is therefore a striking feature of the debate and the conversation that one voice, a very important voice, has not been made part of this conversation. And this is, of course, the Palestinian people. Because if we discuss what one can and cannot say about Israel and Zionism, well, it's what Israel and Zionism do and don't do with respect to the Palestinians, not to any other people or any other subject. And it is therefore of extreme importance to bring the Palestinian back into this conversation, and the document signed by Palestinians 2 years ago makes this attempt with a clear articulation of the view of a lot of Palestinians. And this is what we want to discuss today. We are going to discuss it, the three of us, for about 45 minutes. Then we are going to open up the floor for your questions. And I'd like to give the word to Amos, who will start us off. Amos?
Yes, thank you very much, Alon, and thank you very much, Raef. It's great to have you here. Raef is a great scholar and a friend. So I'll briefly introduce Raef. He's a co-director of the Minerva Center for Humanities at Tel Aviv University, an associate professor at Ono Academic College in Israel, and a senior researcher at the Van Leer Institute in Jerusalem. His field of interests include legal and political theory, citizenship, and Identity and Legal Interpretation. He wrote a lot of pieces on those issues, and including some very interesting interventions on anti-Semitism. So I would like to start, Raef, just can you describe what brought you were among the initiators and the drafters of this document that is now on a chat, everybody can see it. Can you explain what brought you to intervene in this debate, and in that way, in drafting, and the way you drafted it, and you recruited so many intellectuals, Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian intellectuals? So can you just, give us the background and your thoughts at that time?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I would like to thank both of you, Amos and Alon, for giving me this opportunity to speak about this really very, very important issues that in the last couple of years has been on the agenda and creating lots of problems for many Palestinian activists indeed. So thank you for this opportunity. Before I say anything about the declaration or about the issues that the declaration raises, because the declaration is only an event, but the issues of anti-Semitism and the way it's being deployed, it's an ongoing issue that we will discuss. Whatever I will say in this event this evening is just expressing my own views on the matter. So I'm not pretending to speak in the name of those who signed the petition. So let that be clear. Now, there are several things that brought us to issue this petition, actually, or this statement. Probably the first one is what Alon in his introduction mentioned, that Europe commits crimes against Jews in the 20th century, and then she wants to sort of teach morality to the rest of the world, and they want to reach sort of a compromise with Jewish Jewry, and to discuss what does it mean to be anti-Semitic and to prohibit anti-Semitism, which is in itself, of course, a noble aim. But the Palestinians are completely absent from this discussion, though the definition itself touches in most parts issues related to Zionism and Israel. So how can this be that Europe or the West, basically, and Israel reaches sort of a consensus, a certain definition that touches upon the life of the Palestinians, and the Palestinians remain out of this discussion? So we wanted to voice, to intervene in this conversation, but more on issues of content. I think basically one of the things we wanted to do is really to create a space, a third space, because more and more the IHRA and the way it has been deployed, it created sort of a situation where you can't be an anti-colonialist and fighting against anti-Semitism. And we wanted to intervene in this debate and actually say something else, something different. That actually, not only that you can be anti-Zionist and at the same time fighting against anti-Semitism, but actually we wanted to say even stronger point, that if you want to fight against anti-colonialism, against oppression, against disposition, you have to take a stand on issues of anti-Semitism, and you have to fight anti-Semitism, because freedom, equality, liberty, and the fight against all sort of persecution to minorities commits you to take a position on anti-Semitism. On the other hand, any serious, committed fight against the phenomena of anti-Semitism, if it's really committed to the core ideas and principles that drive it to fight against anti-Semitism, must take a global position on issues of oppression, occupation, disposition all over the world. And in this sense, if we extrapolate the idea of anti-Semitism or the fight against anti-Semitism, it should be in accordance or at least cohere with fight against colonialism. So the fight against anti-Semitism and the fight against colonialism, they should cohere and live side by side and live in harmony. And one of the things we try to do in this declaration is actually to say that statement, to create that third space instead of collapsing. But there is also something, let's say, a feeling probably, or anxiety on the part of many Palestinians. The question of Palestine, I mean, the so-called peace process didn't lead anywhere. Not only didn't lead anywhere, under the guise of a peace process, the settlements are increasing in the West Bank. And after the peace process ended up just a process without peace or without any promise for independence or ending the occupation, then we heard the mantra of managing the conflict, just managing the conflict. In the recent years, especially under President Trump and the deal of the century, we are, as Palestinians, we are feeling that they're trying to eliminate the question of Palestine. There is no question of Palestine. And we feel really under attack as a Palestinian. The name of Palestine is under attack. Now, the Palestinians don't have much power. Economically, they're almost powerless. Politically, not to say militarily, they're feeling really weak. The only place that they feel some power is moral power, that we are representing a just cause, that actually we can master the progressive powers in the world, that our cause is morally right. Now, even this, the attack on the Palestinians and the deployment of anti-Semitism is trying to label Palestinians who demand their rights to be anti-Semitic. That gives a feeling of real suffocation. Not only that you are occupied, dispossessed, you are also, they want to deny from you even the right to claim for your rights. Because if you do that, you're racist, anti-Semitic, etc., etc. This is a really sense of suffocation, and we wanted to resist this sense of suffocation. We want to cry out and say, look, we have the right to say, to demand our rights.
You're muted.
Raef, I want to follow up on this issue of anxiety that you said, an issue of suffocation, of being suffocated. When one reads through the document, there is a sense that one trigger that made you and your colleagues to write it is the IHRA definition. That is the definition of anti-Semitism proposed by the International Holocaust Alliance, in which many articulations of critique against Israel is considered anti-Semitism, and I think we all know about this. So I wanted to ask you about what was the role of the IHRA definition really in exacerbating this sense of anxiety, and I don't want to say why you and others are so much opposed to the IHRA definition, because it's clear, but maybe you can give us some more context about that.
Yeah. Look, you can't take the IHRA definition on its own. There's something sneaky. You start from Stockholm Declaration, where you can hardly dispute. Then you go to the definition at the IHRA definition, which sounds, as a definition before the example, sounds somehow, it makes sense. It's, I mean, you can argue against it, but it's not outrageous. And then you move to the example, and then things start to be more problematic. And then you start to the way the whole package is being deployed, adopted by many different Western countries, the way Israel uses the definition. So there's some level between the abstract definition and the way it's deployed, which is really suffocating, which is really, we feel that it aims to put limits on Palestinian activism around the world and silencing the Palestinian cause. Now, I don't know how much we want to go into detail into the IHRA. I can do that. We can go through certain articles mainly in the examples. But in large, there are few problems with the IHRA and the examples, not to speak about their deployment, which really they have silencing effect. But one thing problematic about the IHRA is it dehistoricizes anti-Semitism and the fight against anti-Semitism. The fight against anti-Semitism, when is perceived as a fight for the rights of minority vis-a-vis majority, the weak vis-a-vis the strong, the victims against their victimizer, it has an emancipatory power. So it's not that there is a general fight against anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, it's a practice of certain societies, certain governments at a certain point of time against fragile Jewish minorities. The IHRA dehistoricizes this. It speaks about anti-Semitism before 1948 as anti-Semitism after 1948, even after 1967. It speaks about Palestinian vis-a-vis Israel, their sentiments, their attitude, as they speak about the majority of French people vis-a-vis Jews living in Paris. They speak about as if we're after Dreyfus affairs. I think this is problematic, and this is not good for the fight against anti-Semitism itself, because it's one thing to speak about Jews as a minority at the early 20th century or under the Nazi regime or under even the French in the late 19th century. And another, when Israel has already established, when the Jews, instead of being persecuted minority, they have one of the biggest armies occupying another nation and do ethnic cleansing for another people, and occupying the rest and putting their Israeli citizens as a second-class citizens. Amnesty declared that this is an apartheid regime. So to put all these things together, it's not good for the case of anti-Semitism or the fight against anti-Semitism, because the fight against anti-Semitism is by definition a fight against those who are in power, misusing their power against fragile minorities. So this is one thing. The conflation of anti-Semitism against Jews and against Israel, as if Israel is representative of all Jews, and if these categories collapse into each other, it's not helpful either. It's not helpful even for Jewish Jewry who wants to defend themselves and to dissociate themselves from Israel and its action. So it's bad also in this regard. And there's something, if we really move into certain examples, I have the declaration here in front of me, which is extremely vague, and it might it could be interpreted in a way that almost any Palestinian, by definition, whatever he speaks, he wants to start to speak, and he's already anti-Semitic. If he tells his narrative, he's already anti-Semitic. If he wants to say that in 1948 there was ethnic cleansing, so we have to be silent about that. Can't we tell the story that we were driven out of our homeland? So the right of denying the Jews the right of self-determination. Now, what does that mean? Nobody even bothers to tell us, what does that mean, the right of the Jews to self-determination? Denying that is anti-Semitic. What does the right to self-determination exactly mean? Are the drafters meant to say that actually the Jews in 1948 have the right to self-determination, i.e. to create a Jewish majority in Palestine, i.e. they have the right to expel the Palestinian? Are those guys serious? This is a document supposed to be part of our heritage for human rights discourse? That certain groups have the right to expel others and then to deny their right of return. And all of that in the name of fighting anti-Semitism as part of parcel of a human rights discourse? I mean, is this what they really wants to say? So, and it's not clear for me, where is Israel that they are talking about? I mean, where is Israel? Is the West Bank Israel? Is East Jerusalem Israel? I mean, this is enlarge, or to say that Israel is a racist endeavor is anti-Semitic. Carte blanche, we can't say Israel is practicing racist. I mean, there are 2 million people in the West Bank that they don't have the right to vote. They say this is political. Now, let me give you another hypothetical example. Let's assume tomorrow Israel denies the Palestinian citizen of Israel their right to vote. For example, just for example, are we then entitled to say Israel is a racist country? According to this definition, even then we cannot. This means this is a carte blanche for Israel to do whatever it likes, unconditionally. Beforehand, we can't call it racist. It doesn't say when you can call it racist. It's just beforehand, you cannot call it racist. I think this is really turning the logic of human rights upside down. And now let not be mistaken. Probably we can discuss this further. You can disagree with all Palestinian demands. You can say we don't want to give Palestinians a independent state. We are against the right of return. That the Palestinian and Israel live an excellent life. But you can't call these demands anti-Semitic. This is one thing to call them anti-Semitic, and to disagree with them is another. Because to call something anti-Semitic, i.e. to call it racist, or to call it, that would mean that this is really something beyond politics, that this should be removed from the table. And that's too much, I think.
But Raef, I want to take you a little bit back to your first answer. And you actually blamed the West or Western countries that they promote the IHRA definition. Now I want to ask you, but most of the Jewish organizations and the mainstream, I would say, Jewish communities in Europe and also to a certain extent also in North America, but certainly in Europe, support it. And then the Europeans say, we are victim-based approach. Like the Jews will decide, like the black can say what is anti-blackness, women say what is anti-woman attitude, and Jews will say what is anti-Jewishness is. And many, at least mainstream institutions think that because Israel is very much related to their identity, think that attacking Israel's right to exist, as you mentioned, is attacking their Jewish identity. So how do you, doesn't that have some kind of logic?
First of all, you put too many questions in one question. Now, the first question is a very profound one. The first question relates to the monopoly over experience, ownership over experience. So if a woman feels that she's being harassed, sexually harassed, then probably we can say you're not as a man in a position to say that she hasn't been harassed, because this is something relates to experience, and there's experience is not something abstract. You should let the one who experienced the harassment have this kind of veto power over what is considered to be harassment. Now, there's some truth to that, but only some truth, I think. And then I'll get back to the specific issue of anti-Semitism. I'm a little bit worried about ideas of ownership over experience, though I recognize the importance of experience, because that encourage a politics, first of all, of resentment. That's the way I feel. And the discourse of identity politics that encourage silencing, in the sense that this is a conversation that I have a veto over it, and you're not allowed actually to interfere in the conversation. This creates some boundaries between people. Now, this is not something specific about the issue of definition of anti-Semitism. This is an issue that every minority, every people under occupation can face also. Sometimes, and this is an internal debate within the Palestinian community. Sometimes the Palestinian, many of my Palestinian friends argue your argument, in the sense that we have certain ownership about our experience, so probably solidarity can be in solidarity with us, but they cannot really say more. If I want to be in solidarity with you, let's discuss matter together. Of course, you have probably more weight in this conversation, and you should have more weight in this conversation that I am as a kind of outsider. But the outsider and the insider is not in such a dichotomy. So if you want an universal solidarity, you should accept some level of standing on behalf of the other. Otherwise, the outsider is not taking a responsible stand. It's a stand of resignation that says, okay, you decide. This politics is guided by a sense of guilt, not sense of responsibility on the part of Europeans. Kind of saying, you guys decide and we'll follow. You guys have probably the main say, but I think these issues, I'm not fully in this politics of identity till the end, though I acknowledge that the victims has more say than others. Now, this has been said. Well, the Europeans in this regard, speaking to Jewish communities, they can make this gesture, telling them, you know, guys, we victimized you. Now we cannot be really preaching you how to decide, how to articulate your feeling of being persecuted or harassed by us. Probably this gesture of generosity makes sense, but it makes sense less if it comes at the expense of Palestinians. You want to be sort of generous and kind and give the last say to the Jews defining what do they feel, what is anti-Semitism. You can do this generosity when really the Jews articulate this vis-a-vis Europe. But this generosity seems sort of, I don't want to use bad words, seems to be inauthentic when it comes at the expense of simply a third party, the Palestinians. So that's my answer, that you can take, first of all, this idea of ownership. And second, this is a generosity of Europe that's want to, in part, guided by a certain sense of guilt. They want to look good to themselves, to the Jews, to the state of Israel, and they're ready to sacrifice the rights of the Palestinians just to be liberal, or to think about themselves as liberal and tolerant, and to pay their debt. They pay their moral debt by incurring injustices to a third people, the Palestinians. And that's why the Palestinian, if this conversation is serious, the Palestinians should be participant in this conversation.
Thank you very, very much, Raef, for this elaboration. I think it's crucial. It's a crucial point. You made some very crucial points. I would like to ask you now about, you mentioned the issue of Israel's right to exist. I would ask, do you think, for example, you had a debate with the historians over the right of return, for example, or over BDS, that many think that those could be considered anti-Semitic. And you and the declaration vehemently oppose it. Can you explain?
Opposed to what?
Oppose criminalizing the right of return or BDS as anti-Semitic, which in a way the IHRA does. What is your stand about criminalizing the mere demand of right of return or BDS as anti-Semitic?
Of course, this is really outrageous, I think, to name or to describe the demand for the right of return as anti-Semitic, or the BDS. I mean, what do you want? I mean, what the world do expect from the Palestinians? I mean, everything is they do. I mean, in the 70s, they kidnapped airplanes. That was labeled terrorism. Okay, there's some truth in that, probably. But most political movement, they use force against civilians, and that is a terror. But sometimes that's the way they start. But everything the Palestinians do now is being delegitimized. Even the BDS will resort to international law, non-violent movement. Then what the Palestinian can do? I mean, the use of force is delegitimized. Probably the only thing they can write op-ed in Haaretz or New York Times for the struggle. I mean, those who wants to say that the BDS is illegitimate, can they please tell us how can the Palestinian struggle? How can the Palestinian express and struggle against the ongoing occupation? Those who say that this is anti-Semitic, can they tell us what is the legitimate way to fight against Israel? Because in other way, they say, you should accept the reality as it is. You should accept reality as it is. You should accept the fact that you're living under occupation and to continue to live under occupation. The maximum they would allow sort of op-ed, as I said, or some statement on TV that we are against occupation. So this is really, I think this is a scandal. I think this is really bad for the fight against anti-Semitism. I mean, the Jews are probably the ultimate victim of the 20th century. As such, they have a moral capital. Because if you're a victim, you have a moral capital. Now, moral capital, like any other capital, is a power. And you should think how you should deploy it, where to use it, for what causes to use it. To use it in order to legitimize ethnic cleansing and perpetuation of injustice is just a scandal. You should use it in order to liberate more people, to create more equality, to critique new modes of power, to create colonialism, imperialism, occupation, disposition, not to perpetuate them. This is not really a fight against the principles that stand behind the struggle against anti-Semitism. Because after all, the struggle against anti-Semitism is a struggle for equality and emancipation and freedom for all people to pursue their life without being persecuted. But to use this moral capital to justify this position, that sounds odd to me.
Raef, I want to ask you about the JDA. What are the relations, if any, between the JDA and the documents signed by the Palestinians? And why is it that the Palestinians found it so difficult to not to sign the JDA, although some of the points between the two documents are similar?
Yes, I think there are many similar points between the two documents. It's not a secret, I can say it openly. At a certain stage, I was involved in consultation regarding the JDA. I mean, this is not a secret. I can say that openly. Now, this being said,
even with me and Amos, we can also say this, it's not a secret. We even had the speaking relations.
Yeah. Still, there are few things that makes it difficult. And I'm not speaking in the name of the Palestinian people. I'm speaking, let's say in my name, how do I see the certain difficulties with the JDA? One of them is its positioning vis-a-vis the IHRA. The JDA doesn't posit itself as opposite to the IHRA, sort of. It posits itself sort of a more alternative, but still trying to do certain correction to the IHRA. Now, given the way the IHRA has been deployed, used, manipulated, to put it this way, position the JDA, what in philosophy we used to call as a part of an internal argument, as opposed to external argument, as the difference between sort of categorical imperative and hypothetical imperative to those who... Internal argument is this kind of argument. Look, we, against anti-Semitism, we understand the motives behind the IHRA. We sort of usually also, we're liberal, progressive people, and we fight against anti-Semitism. But we want to tell you that the way you want to run this fight is not exactly the way to do it. And the IHRA is sort of misfiring. Now, this is a kind of people who are situated in a certain place and they want to correct the way anti-Semitism, the fight against anti-Semitism is being conducted, which is perfect. And they say that the fight against anti-Semitism shouldn't contradict the struggle of Palestinians against occupation and against anti-colonialism, their fight against colonialism. So they're trying to bring the fight against anti-Semitism in a way that cohere with the Palestinian struggle to end occupation, dispossession, and the anti-colonialism. Now, this is a noble aim, I think, but the Palestinians are not situated there. The Palestinians are struggling to end occupation, to end dispossession, to end colonialism. And if there's a role on the part of the Palestinian progressive intellectuals, is actually, first of all, to join that struggle. That's where they are situated with their people fighting just cause. And part of their struggle, the mirror image of, let's say, Jewish liberal intellectual, is to say, look, we're struggling against colonialism, against occupation. We have to be careful that this struggle also should cohere with the struggle against anti-Semitism. We shouldn't let our sort of anger or even hate of Israel practices of occupation bring us to the point where our struggle might slide to anti-Semitic discourse. Now, there's issue of positionality here. Where do you position yourself? Now, there are certain places in the document that leave certain ambiguities that many Palestinians feel that it's self-incriminating, sort of, to speak. And the whole idea of a definition, which means that you want to label someone as anti-Semitic and to sign to this when you are the weaker side in every possible aspect, economically, politically, military. To put on yourself another moral constraint in this regard, and to create an endless debate within the Palestinian about every, I think the Palestinian need some unity at this point. And to enter an endless debate for them is probably weakening for them, weakening their unity that they needed very. Now, does that sound like claiming that those that who are victims, they have certain discounts morally? Maybe yes, maybe not. Do they have carte blanche? No, they don't have carte blanche for everything. But positionality matters. Positionality matters. And in this sense, this is not a critique of the GDA. Sometimes internal critique are the most powerful ones. Because if you want to speak sort of a universal language that is accepted by everybody, you wouldn't get the same attention probably. So
I think it was fundamental that the Palestinians had their own document about anti-Semitism. It was very powerful.
Yeah, there's positionality matters. When you do politics, positionality matters. You stand and you say, we are against Israeli occupation, dispossession, and from this position with our people, we are condemning anti-Semitism. It would look different had this been in another kind of document. So there is power and there's limits. There are weaknesses for internal arguments that you approach your own constituency first. You're not trying to create the universe as your constituency. You limit your constituency, you get their ear, and then you speak. There's a logic to that. And apart from that, there are certain articles that it's difficult for Palestinians to sign, and that's fine.
Raef, I want to ask you, some years ago, you published an influential essay, When Does a Settler Become a Native? With apologies to Mamdani. There you have a poetic sentence that since then has had a life of its own, and it's beautiful and cited often. I want to read it and ask for your reaction to it. You write, the Europeans see the back of the Jewish refugee fleeing for his life. The Palestinian sees the face of the settler colonialist taking over his land. So if you can tell us, what did you mean? How does this fit within your overall thinking? It's a beautiful sentence.
Look, this sentence really could be elaborated. I think this duality explains the vitality of Zionism. The vitality in the sense that it can combine at the same time the practices of the discourse of the colonizer and the colonized, and the practices of the colonizer and the colonized. Look, let me elaborate on this a little bit. There's a chapter that I dropped from a recent paper, but I think to publish it soon. And the chapters does this, and this is probably shows the way that the starting noble point of Zionism that could be thought as something that can have a universal solidarity, how from there you end up in a way that you are a victimizer. And it's important to notice that there is something sliding along the way, and you cannot, at the end point, speak as if you are at the starting point. Let me explain that. Look, if you're a humanist by the end of 19th century and you're witnessing what's happening in terms of persecution to the Jews in Europe, you must have a heart of stone not to have solidarity with the Jews in Europe. Really, I mean, it's a test case for your moral sensibilities, how you react to the fragility of Jews in Europe. So at that moment, I think, to take a position with the Jews is, I think it's really a test point. Now, from there you can say, okay, let's struggle for individual equality, and you can say for collective equality in Europe. So here starts a divergence. Still, in both cases, I'm on that. I'm for Arendt and Lazar, who actually said we deserve to be treated as groups and to solve our problem as a group, as a collectivity. From there, those who demand group rights, there's a diversion between those who want it in Europe and those who want it outside Europe as a territorial entity. And then within the territorial, you have a diversion between those who want it in Uganda and those who wants it, or Argentina, and those who want it in Palestine. That diversion is not very important. But when you get to Palestine, you get another diversion. Those who want a cultural rights for the Jews, basically, and those who want political rights. Within the political, you find another diversion. Those who are ready to accept binational state, and those who want to insist on one national state. Within the one national state, you would get a diversion, sort of, between the revisionists and, let's say, the labor movements, who at least the labor who would accept the division of the land, and those who would insist that they want all of Palestine. Okay? Now look where you started and look where you ended up, that you want to settle Hebron. And still the rhetoric that you use is the starting point of Dreyfus. But between Dreyfus and settling in Hebron, there is a long way. There are lots of divergence along the way. I can stand with you in Dreyfus and stand against you in Hebron. I stand also against you in 1948 or in 1967. Each stage needs a new justification. You can't simply borrow arguments from the beginning of the narrative and deploy them at the end of the narrative. There are too many events in the middle. There are changes in power relations along the way that make what seems to be valid at the beginning invalid toward the end. And that's the connection that the Europeans see the fragility of the Jews. But we as a Palestinian, we see them as settlers and soldiers taking over our lands. It's not that we imagine them, that's the fact. I'm so versed in the history of Zionism and the history of the conflict. There's lots of complexities along the way. There are lots of fine details, and all details are important. But in global terms, I can tell the story in 3-4 sentences. One group persecuted in Europe came to another land, drove its people out. Those who remained, occupy them or turn them into second-class citizens. As an overall, this is the story. So that's the room for maneuver for Zionism, that they still play the card of yesterday in Europe as victims, and they continue to practice this position against the Palestinian as victimizer, and have this vitality that at the same time, they have the upper hand militarily, and they're trying to have the upper hand morally at the same time. And this probably explains why the settler colonialism of Israel is really a little bit more difficult to really to show its cruelty or its violence, in part because you can finally hard settler projects that has such a huge sympathy of the nation that's doing this settler colonial project in the 19th and the 20th century. So that sentence tried to capture the displacement of the validity of one argument at a certain point in time, to transpose it to completely another context and to misuse
it. I would like to now ask you a few questions from the audience. We have quite a lot of questions and we will not be able to address all of them. But this is a very simple one, and I think it's worthwhile. Richard Rubin is asking, is there a point of defining anti-Semitism or racism? And if so, what would be your definition?
This is really an excellent question because I'm struggling with it. I'm struggling with it not only in the case of anti-Semitism, in general, philosophically. Here's the dilemma. The moment you say about something racist, and anti-Semitism is clearly a form of racism. This is my fear. And this applies not only, as I say, to anti-Semitism, to other deployments of racism, even in the case of Israel, in the case of Palestinian vis-a-vis the state of Israel. When you call something racist, which might be racist, in fact, or I don't know, you seems to say, this is something beyond politics. This is something that we should have absolute consensus against. It should be completely outside the table. Now, this is not a question of left or right here. Liberals do tend to think that we should keep things outside the table. They are outside the debate. Now, there are good aspects to put things outside the debate as completely illegitimate. But there's also something dehistoricizing and depoliticizing by putting things completely outside the debate. And here, sometimes radical left and radical right can find a common language. Because sometimes I take seriously anxieties of different groups. I take their anxieties everywhere, seriously. And by putting certain things outside the table, sometimes you narrow the depth of your historical investigation. Sometimes you don't take reality too serious. You speak like a priest. I have a tendency to be psychoanalytic. The difference between priest and psychoanalysis is that the priest treats you as a moral person, basically, neglects your factuality. He preaches you. Psychoanalytic takes you as you are, not as you should be. The difference is the depth of our investigation. If we want to understand more, we should put more on the table. Now, I am fully aware this is playing with the devil, because to remove things from the table, we put restraints on ourselves that there are things that are unthinkable and shouldn't be considered under any circumstances. But this comes with a price. And if we want to solve political problems, we have to think them through very deeply. So in this regard, I prefer to speak about problems, resources, power relation, etc. I would like to keep, as far as possible, naming things as racist or anti-Semitic as far as limited, and speak about the things themselves. But this is just, there's something aesthetic about my position that I really want to play with the devil. Now, people who wants to play with the devil usually have higher level of discipline because they think they can stop at the middle whenever they can cross the abyss and come back. But this is sort of my approach to these things. It's completely personal. Both ways, they have dangers. Also, my attitude has dangers because it allows too many voices to be aired out in the public sphere.
Alon, do you want to go, or I will elaborate on that? You're muted.
Raef, it seems that we raise so many issues that sometimes the current debate on anti-Semitism seems to be a debate on something else altogether. It's not only about anti-Semitism. It's about European guilt. It's about Israel justification to its deeds, about silencing the Palestinians. Just a comment.
Look, anything you can say to your students in a debate, in political debate, you can say a statement that it's true, but then every statement has two levels of a statement. One, it could be truth or false, but then there is the context that makes making the statement in itself sort of an intervention in a certain political, social setting. I never thought that it's wise to reduce one to the other. That what I mean by that is, it's clearly that the way anti-Semitism is being deployed is a way, both, as you said, to silence Palestinian voices, definitely, to appease sort of European guilt. They feel good about themselves, so they can be generous at the expense of the Palestinian. So this is the deployment, this is the context, this is the politics of it. But things are never only deployment, in the sense that probably one can notice that there are manifestations of anti-Semitism. I mean, I'm ready to agree with that, to concede that, and I think that's something that should be combated. But look what's happening now in Ukraine, where Poland is not ready to accept simply people with brown, dark skin or Muslims as refugees. What I want to say is that despite the fact that there are manifestations of anti-Semitism, I think Israel is a powerful state. Jewish communities are flourishing around the world. I mean, we're not in 1990s. We're not in 1890s or 1920s or 30s. We're not. So while one should acknowledge that there are lots of signs of anti-Semitism, but this is not an imminent danger. It's not. The Jews relatively are safe. But people of color, look at Palestinians in so many universities that really being to disciplinary procedures because their political attitudes. How many conferences were canceled in Europe, Germany, and England? Who is being persecuted? Who is being treated because of his color, because of his religion these days? I think mostly are Muslim and people of color, black and brown people. And some effort should be put there. So while conceding the reality of anti-Semitism, the amount of really working on the issue, as this is the issue that should occupy international community, I think it's a little bit overrated, and one should dare to say it. Of course, I expect so many people tomorrow saying this is in itself an anti-Semitic statement. But when you use anti-Semitism in such loose way, it's really debasing of the currency of anti-Semitism.
So, Raef, I want to ask you one last question from the audience. And, do you think the problem can be solved if we had an anti-Palestinianism definition?
I'm ambivalent about that. Actually, this is a tricky question because how many declarations you want to make? Anti-Palestinianism and anti-Armenianism, and what about the Kurds, and what about American Indians? I mean, clearly every group has experienced things in a different way. Now, and there is unique experiences. I would like to see that the struggle against racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia more kind of geared toward a universal language. This enclaves of everybody wants to stress his unique experience. I'm afraid this fragmentation of struggles can eclipse a universal horizon. So if you want to ask me between making one statement against anti-Semitism and another against anti-Palestinianism, or to put both of them as part and parcel of a universal struggle for equality, emancipation, human rights, liberation, and self-determination, of course, I would prefer the second route. I'm not sure if it's more helpful. It's a matter, again, you might call it of taste, of a sensibility, of attitude. There's no guarantee that this is the right way. There's no guarantee that it has proven in the past or it would prove itself in the future. But too much identity politics, I think it's not good for politics and for the health.
Okay, thank you, Raef. Before I pass it on to Alon to conclude, I just want to say But what you actually said is that, according to the IHRA and the way it is deployed, fighting for equality becomes anti-Semitic, and that's a big. This is a big paradox. I mean, this is something that cannot stand.
Definitely. I mean, if denying, if turning Israel to state of its citizens might end up anti-Semitic, to say binational state from the river to the sea, with equal voting rights and equal group rights, collective rights for the Jews as well, of course, this might be anti-Semitic. I mean, anything that you don't accept according to Zionist vision, I mean, left Zionist vision, the IHRA would accept left Zionist vision of two-state solution. But anything beyond that sound like anti-Semitic. Now, I can understand why people would resist binational state. They can say it will not work. We tried it. Okay, but this has nothing to do with moral discourse of anti-Semitism.
Okay, Alon.
A very fitting ending with equal rights to all, just as it's so obvious to us that we want equal rights from where I sit in America. Yes, equal rights to all. So why not elsewhere? And in Ukraine, certainly. So thank you, Raef.
Thank you all, guys. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks to our audience.
Opportunity.
And see you in our next event. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.